everyone, and welcome to Rainbow Connections, a show where we interview TTRPG creators about their creations and introduce you to some amazing games. I am Serafina Smith for Streaming Rainbow. Today we have Federico Sohns with us, the writer and illustrator of Zephyr, an anarchist game of fleeting identities. Welcome, Federico. We're glad to have you with us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump into it. First of all, let's introduce the game. What is Zephyr?
So Zephyr is basically a TTRPG in which you travel a sentient landmass called Ophoi to fulfill sacred obligations for your community. It's a survival game in a big way. And it's basically a game about the growth of the self and the community as you travel, and sort of like, in the sort of like I don't know, sort of like the journey that reveals eventually, your passions and the stuff that you truly care for and that kind of thing. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's ambitious. I'm impressed. Did you have that goal in mind when you started?
I'm not sure. I think it kind of just turned out that way because I've been, like, the last 10 years of my life, I've been immigrating from one place to the other. So it just naturally, those are basically themes that just come naturally, I think, in my work. But initially, what I wanted to do and what I ended up doing is I wanted to sort of create a game that spoke about ways of organizing society and community outside of states. So that's sort of like the anarchist part. To speak about, like, what people that used to and currently live outside of state, the sort of like social institutions that they do, the way they sort out their issues, the way they, just generally go about being in community. So I kind of wanted to translate that into the game. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the initial goal.
Do you think that the game reflects the sort of cultures and economies of non-statist societies, or is it creating something new?
Well, of course, like, to be honest, like, there's been more societies in non-state forms in our history than in state form. So really making like a broad generalization of it is impossible. I did take some elements that I think are hard generally for people to grasp. People coming from states to grasp, like stuff like gift economies, stuff like moiety structures, and I took a couple of those institutions and I poured them in just to get a taste of basically what that would be like in a way. So yeah, that's basically what I did. It's not inspired in any one particular culture or community, and it doesn't really aim to represent every single community or society outside the state that has ever. So that's impossible. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Gotcha. So most of my questions are going to be about the game itself, but like, I would be missing out if I didn't ask about the absolutely gorgeous art of the source book, because it's like half rules and half a beautiful graphic novel. So, like, tell me about that creative process, because that is it jumped out at me immediately when I saw this game.
Sure. Yeah, it's all done by myself. I started drawing around 2019. Basically, I bought myself a surface, a computer that you can actually draw on.
Mhm.
And my best friend Valeria, she taught me how to draw. And at the time, I was living in London, so I wasn't here. So it basically taught me, online through like Discord calls and stuff like that. And I practiced in 2019 and in 2020, probably like the end of 2020, around October, I made like a couple of pieces that like it really felt to myself like, damn, I can actually illustrate an RPG book. Like, so a couple of breakthrough pieces that just gave me the confidence to take that and continue to do it over like 4 years. And what you have in the book is basically 4 years of work from that point, around October 2020 onwards. And if you look very carefully, it's very tiny, but each spread generally has like a date that shows you like the month and the year that I made the piece. So you can maybe track some sort of evolution, because of course, like when you're early on, like that one that's showing right now, the Crown Stomper, that big guy, that was the one that I did in October 2020. That kind of, yeah. And there's a couple more there that, yeah, that really gave me the confidence to illustrate the book. So yeah.
Awesome. So one thing that I like about the book is the meta structure of it, the way that you not only arrange the information in a logical way, but you help provide helpful guidance for how to use the structure. Something that, frankly, a lot of big name TPRPG books don't do. So, what inspired that extra guidance?
Well, I think it's something that also goes into the sheer amount of art that has the book. Like, I knew that I was like, both with the design and the premise, I knew that I was asking of players a lot. Like, you're getting into a system that is very unlike most of what's out there. You're getting into a group dynamic that maybe isn't like super different from what you're used to, but the objectives, like you're not really robbing graves and killing people.
Right.
So you're asking like a series of things from people that they're not used to, and so because of that, you have to both offer like the as much guidance as you can in how to use the book and how to peruse the different sections, and so like ease them into the world, because it's a very weird world also. But also like with the amount of art, like the fantasy that I'm writing in it doesn't really have so many sort of like anchors in popular culture that you can say, oh, it looks like a Western in space or something like that, that you
Right.
could just get along with like just a couple of images. It had to have a lot of like visual sort of like, representation, so people can be like building that visual library of how this weird world looks like. So I think those two things go together in accessibility and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really worked out well the way that it that necessity bred something good here in this, I think.
Thanks.
So next question, basing your game around colored tokens. That it's so pretty and so cool. And I want to know, like, what was the inspiration for that? Because like in my head, the first thing that I thought was, oh, he's like demonstrating like this non-capitalist economy sort of thing with the economy of the game. um but what was it like? Just match the feel of the game? Like, it's obviously it helps shape the game like systemically and in the narrative. And so I just I think my question is sort of vague. Tell me about the tokens. They're so cool.
Yeah, the tokens are pretty huge for the game. It's one of those. I think it's one of those things that I thought about it, and I'm like, this game really wouldn't be it if it had dice. Like it really needs tokens. Tokens have such a powerful weight in the game because they are basically representations of matter in the fantasy world. The matter that is represented. It's Zephyr. That's the name of the game, and the name of the stuff that makes all that is. In the same way that we think of atoms, well, these communities, the communities of Windfolk that you're going to take the roles on, they think of everything made of Zephyr. And so the tokens represent that. And this idea, like atoms are like a social construct. You know, Democritus never had seen an atom when he thought about them. Didn't even have the tools. It's ancient Greece and stuff like that. And in the same way, these people thought about the, universe, the world created by this Zephyr stuff. And particularly, the combination of these tokens makes for the feelings that we feel, like the way we perceive the world, the way we perceive others, and we form our ideas and we draw meaning from others. Is deeply tied to how we feel about them. Everything we conceive. It's like I conceive of my room here as like a room that I feel nostalgic about because it's a room I grew up in, and I don't know, like with people, the same thing happens with the land that surrounds it. It's the same. So the idea was that these tokens weren't just going to be part of your constitution, so what you're made of. They essentially represent your HP in a way, because if you lose them, you die in the game. Right. But at the same time, you could use them not just as a way to invest energy into like a particular task that or a particular thing that requires a lot of effort throughout your journey, but also you can combine them in different ways to express feelings and to establish like a sentimental connection to different aspects of the world. And the way the tokens move around is very thematically significant because one of the big things about stateless societies is the way they conceive their connection to nature and the world around them. States historically have created this sort of like separation between man and nature, man and all the other life forms that are beneath them in a sort of hierarchy of things. And all of these concepts of like dualism and the separation of things, they're usually not that prevalent, if at all prevalent, in stateless societies. And so to signify that in the game, I had this thing where your tokens could be in your constitution. So we could talk about tokens that are making your character and their physical, their physical and spiritual sort of like composition, who they are. They could be in your region, so in the places and the life forms that are around you, or they could be outside of the game. And so in the game, you have three ways of using the tokens. One is basically for your reveals, which are basically your rolls. They just happen, and so you just use them with the tokens from your constitution, which means that if you're very weak, you have less tokens, you're more likely to fail at stuff because you have less life energy, less energy in general to do stuff. But the really interesting thing for me is that you then have two uses of tokens, which they can be spent. So they are taken from your constitution to your region. So there's a connection, there's a life force that goes from your being to the world around you and the people around you, or you can discard them. So they basically go away. And you're going to notice something in the book, which is that a lot of the tech and the stuff, the skills and the knowledge that you can have as you build your character, because it's a game in which character builds are quite complex. A lot of the stuff that sort of pushes your character to believe in this sort of like supremacy of their own kin above the rest, and of like starting to think of the trees, the creatures that surround them as like things that are just utilitarian, and less of like equal kin that is just expressed in a different way in the world. The stuff that creates a dualism, that separation, usually gives you advantages, but has you discard tokens. So those tokens go outside of the game. And the stuff that has to do with skills and knowledge that is sort of like showing that connection to the natural world has you spend tokens. So they move from your constitution to the region. And so if you play things like optimally, because it's a complex game that you're going to develop some sort of mastery as you play like a longer game. It's another game for one shots, I'd say. I think it's one of those games that you want to take for a longer run. But generally, if you play along the institutions and the skills and the technologies, I call them technologies generally, that have to do with preserving that connection to the natural world, you're going to move those tokens to the region and then be able to use those tokens for something else, sometimes even recover them back, and creating this positive feedback loop in opposition to a negative feedback loop in which your character becomes like slowly estranged from the natural world, and so they lose connection. So that I think there's a very potent thematic significance in those two uses of tokens, the spends and the discards, that I kind of tried to put into the book. So yeah.
It's fascinating. Using the same tokens that form the character's constitution to activate abilities makes for the interesting side effect that cooking and eating become a more important part of the fiction. Was that intentional? That
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally. It's a survival game at its core. Like your goal might be this grand obligation that you have to your community, but everything that happens in between, it might be, of course, like issues that might happen with other communities, or with sort of like the bad guys from the setting, which are the salt states.
right.
But a lot of the time, it's gonna be, the issue of like hunting, gathering, and cooking, so that you can have those tokens just be healthy in a way, and staying energized for any challenges that might pop up. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's gonna be I can't wait to dig into this and see the different themes that pop up from this. So the focus on feelings, and when I say that, I mean both the alien feelings of the Zephyr colors and the more familiar feelings that their combinations evoke in the characters, makes for a very explorative game that I think will be a unique experience for players. What sort of narratives and themes do you find unfold when the game mechanics are tied to the characters' feelings like that?
Well, the whole idea of like sort of like going into a journey that as you go outside of like your comfort zone, and the characters leave their communities, which that's a thing that's in every game of Zephyr starts like that. Every game of Zephyr starts with a group of people that take obligations from their community. These are things that your community like, it's not something that they could do like every day, that it'd be easy to like assign to just anyone. I don't know, this guy is maybe the woodcutter, and this guy might be good at, I don't know, growing yams. But if someone needs to repair a bridge that is like in a far off peak, that's not something that you can easily assign to anyone. And so this institution of the Windfolk happens to be in the game, which is the festivities. So each year, the Windfolk that are sort of like stepping into adulthood take into these grand obligations, and so they go out in the world to, you know, meet other people, but also to fulfill the kind of things the community needs and the communities that are interconnected need, that fall outside of the ordinary. So as they travel throughout that set, this sort of like theme of self-growth is going to be happening, because expressing, like establishing those feelings is a pretty powerful skill. Yes, it takes like some tokens from you. You have to spend like a combination, but it's an automatic success at any role, essentially. So you're going to be like, as a result of that, you're going to be succeeding and establish like a sentimental connection. This sort of like passions and the sort of like feelings that pushed you forth to basically succeed at that challenge. So that sort of theme of like self-growth through travel, and specifically like a travel with like a particular objective. Like, we're not touristing here. It's like a it's a pretty big thing that's connected to your community. I think that's like a major theme that I wanted to express through the book. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like one of the things as I was reading that I thought uh, would be an interesting experience when playing is the way that as you change your tokens, as you change your feelings, you're changing the makeup of yourself. And I was just trying to imagine the way that that would express myself in my playing. Like, oh, now I am this character, but this character is now different because I have two violet tokens, and it's interesting. Have you done a lot of playtesting with this game? Have you seen a lot of this come out?
Yeah, I've seen that come out. I'll give you an example, for example, of a game that we had like a couple of months ago, um, where this character, like, she was basically a glider. She's a person that has like a big fan and is like one of the archetypes of the book. It's basically, you can sort of like go through the Zephyr winds and just get to places very far. And it means that, you know, if the group has to send a message to a neighboring community, they can just do that very quickly, like in a couple of minutes, instead of like maybe taking 3 days of walking there, or retrieving something or whatever. It's like an archetype. Like in the first session, they had sort of like a test flight kind of thing, like just to test the waters. And this player had like a huge monarch fan, just fans like super big. It can carry another windfolk with you, and they had a horrible crash during that flight. And it was like a thing where like they had that crash. The crash almost kills them, and over like the next 4 or 5 sessions, there was this inner struggle of like the fear that the character and the player in a way felt, of like just taking off and flying again, and this thing that she had to sort of like surpass in order for, you know, her personal story to develop later on. Like there was a time when like she could have made things easier, maybe flying away, but like she was still sort of like fighting against that fear of flying that she had developed from this event, until the moment where it was like, we need some information. We need to scout ahead, because there might be like a fort of the salt states, like there was like some pile of smoke. So we need to know what's going on, and this is sort of like the way to do it. So we need you to do this for us, kind of thing. So she made like a super cool flight, and it was like a super cool scene, and her character evolved a lot, because suddenly she found like, you know, actually there's a reason why I learned to fly these things, and sort of like developed as it was, and it was pretty cool. And that kind of thing, like you're going to see it throughout different archetypes. Of course, the archetypes in Zephyr like are very different from archetypes in a D&D-esque game, because you know you're gonna have your cook, sort of like your hunter, maybe like some sort of engineer that is like very good at like making sort of like makeshift sort of like I don't know, like a refuge or something like that. So yeah, it's been pretty cool. The games that we've played, it's always been a thing. Just see how characters evolve in that. So yeah.
Tell me about Oi. Is that how it's pronounced?
Mm-hmm.
Versus obligations and the way that they tie into the storytelling of Zephyr.
Cool. So Oi is basically a sort of, it's kind of like a measure of social awkwardness. It's a concept that sort of like surfaces when you're like, okay, I'm, for example, like at a date, and this person, like, they've been talking about themselves for like a long time, and they haven't asked me anything. They haven't asked anything about me, and it's not like they're, you know, they might be venting, and so you can understand, oh, they must be like in a lot of stress, and so they can do it. They're just like self-centered, and so Winfolk put like a name to this feeling of like, you know, what's happening here, which is called Oi, and it's a measure of reciprocity. It's like, because of the metaphysics of the world, that feeling of like, you know, this person is really not, you know, interested in having like an equal conversation. They can smell that, and it has a smell, and it's called Oi. And so when you forge your obligation, these grand obligations that are forged at the start of the game, you use that Oi to sort of craft the adventure, like the goals of the adventure are crafted by the players, and in return, you basically get the knowledge and the technologies that you're going to be equipped with for the journey. You can learn, of course, more stuff later on, but most of the stuff you're going to get is going to be at the character creation stage with regards to technologies. So it's pretty cool. It's a mechanic that's very much inspired by the way pledges worked in Changeling the Lost, where basically your players, they think about the sort of obligation they want to fulfill. For example, let's talk about like this bridge repairing obligation, and they go through like a list of sort of like characteristics of the obligation, like how long will it take to get there? Can there be like very dangerous wildlife around it that might, you know, make the stuff more dangerous? Is it something? Is it a favor towards one person in particular, or is it something that's actually benefiting the whole community and stuff like that? So you go through each of those questions, and the different answers that the game allows you to pick from add different amounts of Oi. So you end up with a number, and that number is the sort of like weight of responsibility that the community has placed upon you. And in return, you can use those that number basically to get your technologies, to basically equip your characters with the skills that they need. One interesting aspect of it is that while the game has like a number, like it's really more of a vibe for in actual in universe. Like it's not, there's no prize to the trip to go to repair the bridge, and at the same time, you always use the number that you get to spend is never exactly the same number that you got as a result of that calculation, because in a way it's impossible to for the community to give you the same thing in return. Like they're not going to repair another bridge or something like that. It's like there's always a differential, and that goes into a lot of what makes gift communities. So gift economies. So in gift economies, in stateless societies generally, if you're given a gift, you are expected to give back something, either of more or less value, and that it's something that can sort of like condition the way you're seen depending on the situation. Maybe you got given something by someone you don't really like that much, so you give them something of less overall value or something like that. But you never give a gift back. This is like, imagine if like it's a thing that even in our society is like very frowned upon. If you gave me something, I'm not going to give it back to you on your birthday or something like that. It's a very old thing that comes from gift communities, that sort of like taboo of giving something back to that same person specifically, usually. So that aspect of gift economies, I wanted to sort of like represent in this exchange of obligations that happens during the creation of the obligations and the start of the game. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like Zephyr offers particular challenges for the average TTRPG gamer that they may have to overcome to get a good experience with their fellow players? And conversely, does it offer any particular rewards that one might be less likely to find in other systems? I guess that's kind of
yeah, totally. I do. I think that it's one of those games. Like I find on and off as I've played games and worked on games. I've been working on games for like 8 years now, more or less. That there are some games that like really sort of like escape the D&D formula, or like the more traditional formula, that are actually sometimes easier to introduce to people that are entirely new to TTRPGs than to seasoned veterans of, I don't know, Pathfinder or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's because of the expectations of the creative space. You expect there to be skills, you expect there to be numbers and sort of like attributes, and to go out and kill monsters for experience. And there's really none of that in here. Now, of course, like, it's not 2015 anymore. Like, we have much more of a wide array of like indie games that have like done strides to just push us out of that comfort zone. But I still think that a lot of even the indie gamers that are used to like new ways of designing games are gonna find in Zephyr a thing which is it's quite a complex game. There's a lot of game to it. There's a lot of like mechanical weight to it, and a lot of like nuance choices that you're going to do. There's a lot of game mastery involved that you're going to develop across sessions. So while of course like there's a lot of unique mechanical things in the game, I think the more unique aspect of it, and that might throw even seasoned indie gamers off, is the fact that it's quite complex. Because that's the thing. Like you get like new ideas very often, but new ideas that are pretty like complex and have a lot of like mechanical weight to it, maybe not so much. So I think that's a thing that can throw people off, the fact that there's a new language to learn, and that language is expressed through just a very wide variety of choices. You don't get like maybe one or two little things that you can tweak here and there, and you're done like with character creation in like 30 minutes or something. It's a game in which, for example, character creation, like it will take you a whole session, like pretty handily. So yeah, that's something that I think it's a bit hard to get into in a way. The more you're used to like traditional role playing games, the more it might be hard. So then we go back again to the whole idea of like, why is there so many illustrations, and why is there like a very particular path that the book is sort of like set to be read in, like, starting with like this initial sort of like creation myths that are presented in the game that have gameplay elements as you create your character. So yeah, I think it's not a particularly easy game to get into, but I think it's worth it because it's one of those things that are very weird, that are really trying not just to get you out of the comfort zone in terms of gaming, but also thinking about the society in which you live in, the sort of like institutions that you take for granted, and hopefully to like maybe invite people to take a peek at how other human societies, other human communities have done things across history, because there's a lot, and unfortunately we're not really taught about them.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. So Ofoy. The decision to make Ofoy, which is the setting of the game, a sentient landmass, and not only that, but its features, like its mountains, its rivers, etc., are not just background, but sort of demi characters themselves with their own feelings and obligations. I think that results in a relationship with the surroundings that is more intimate and
Yeah.
requests reciprocity. So, like, is
Mm-hmm.
there like an environmental message to be found there about the relationship of a culture with the world? Is that where we're going?
Yeah, it totally it goes back to the same reason why this whole like token usage of like spending and stuff like that, the connection with your environment and stuff around it goes thematically with this. Like, if my game is to get players to play as people that do see nature, and as not something that's separate from them, but them as just being part of this whole thing, where nature doesn't even nature even stops being a concept, because the concept disappears once you understand that there is no separation and that nature is everything. So there's no point to actually saying, oh, we're this and then there's nature. So then of course you stop describing things as inert. Like, you wouldn't describe Earth as just like an inert mass of like stuff. It's a living organism, and in the same way, you as a human are actually an assemblage of like microorganisms and stuff. The Earth itself is the same. So it's one of those things that like I wouldn't have described. I think it's a good Kickstarter for what's something you'll find in this book to talk about, a sentient landmass. It's a landmass, but it's sentient. Why is it sentient? Well, because the people you're going to play as think of it as sentient. There isn't like an objective truth of like, aha, actually a Foy is inert. We're not trying to do that. Like, we're really talking about like the belief of the people you're going to play as, and how it should be presented for you to get on theme. Like, I'm planning, like, for example, eventually to release a what's it called, a supplement in which you play as people from the salt states that do have, of course, the whole like stately idea of separation between them and nature, etc. And when I introduce that book, I'm going to probably talk about Laffoy as being just a continent with nothing in particular about it being sentient or something like that, because the people you are basically about to impersonate or play as don't think of it as a sentient continent. I think that's kind of the way. There are no objective truths here. They're interpretations, and the interpretations are in line with the sort of message or the beliefs of the people that you're going to play as. So yeah.
All right. How do you think? So we've talked about this a little bit, but the narrative structure of the games themselves, how do you feel like that is distinguished from other games here in Zephyr? Like, because to me, it seems like there's going to be different kind of stories. I feel like we're going to be telling different kind of stories than you're going to tell in other systems. And I want to hear from you what the difference is in those stories.
Certainly. There's like a very radical difference, especially if you're coming from like traditional games, in the fact that, you know, if you've ever been to like or read one of those you know, chapters on how to GM or how to plan a campaign or something. There's something that at least I was taught back in the day, where like, oh, if you're going to be the GM, you're going to need to know how the campaign starts and more or less where you want to go, point A and point C, and then, you know, it might deviate through point B and everything the characters do, etc. But you might want to have more or less of a vague idea of where you're going, but you want to know how it's going to start. And here it's very different because it kind of shakes it up a bit, because first of all, the players, they're determining the obligations, so they're telling you, they're crafting that ending, that end goal, as it is, not the ending itself, but the place they're going for is set by them, and the game is setting you up from the start for how it starts, right? It starts with the festivities. Everyone is gathered in their community, like getting their obligations. Maybe you decide where the community is set across a foy, where they start, etc. But the storyteller doesn't have to do much to, like, you know, guide them somewhere that they might have in mind, or that they had some sort of vague plan, or even a more strict plan if, like, you happen to be at a table in which players are more hands-off with the story and they don't mind the GM being more authorial, let's say. In this game, like, you're kind of hands-off as a GM, as a narrator from that. So at least I thought, for me, it was like, first of all, it's a big weight off my shoulders, because it's something that is decided, we all together decided, and the players decide where their obligations are going to take them. And at the same time, it releases a lot of my brain power to focus on how the trip is not going to be as straightforward as they think it's going to be. Like, they might be like, oh, we're starting at this mountain and we're heading towards these plains and these forests towards that mountain where the bridge has to be repaired. That's going to be breezy, you know, you can go and go across the river, and they're going to be talking about this stuff in the first session. And like, I'm already thinking how that's not going to be the case. How there's going to be maybe like a huge earthquake and a crack opens in the earth, and they have to go through like a huge detour. And it's very fun because you're thinking about how to introduce the unexpected, and you're putting much more of your brain power on that on, oh, if they maybe take this road, then I can't take them to this thing that I had planned like 5 days ago or something like that. I think it's really cool as a storyteller. It's really cool. The shared sort of like responsibility, the shared narrative responsibility is mechanized in the game actually, and that's actually super cool because it's not just that they set the obligations. They have access to a few things. For example, with the tokens that they have in the region, they can use to, for example, change the weather, or they can use to make alterations to their environment and stuff like that. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic. It's quite different if you're coming from traditional games, particularly with regards to how the story is going to be structured and what your responsibilities are going to be with regards to that.
Marvelous. Is there anything else you want to tell us about the game before I close this up?
Yeah, probably talk a little bit about the salt states, which
Yeah.
are sort of like the entities that are at the center of a foy. So if more or less like the areas where Windfolk lives are at the periphery, like it's a huge part of the continent, but at the center of the continent there's like a valley with like a plain where the salt states are. And the salt states sort of like represent a sort of like antagonistic society to that of Windfolk, in which the concept of debt is really big. And that's a big split in the themes between the obligations of the Windfolk and this measure of reciprocity and debt. Debt is something that it's different from an obligation because a debt is countable. You can assign a number to it, a price, and because it's countable, it's transferable. So it can be turned into money, and you can give it to someone else. In an obligation, like if you go with, I don't know, Mary to the cinema, you can't be like, oh, Mary, I can't go. Pedro's going to go with you. You can't do that. But in a debt society, if everything's monetized, if everything is turned into this transferable value thing, it creates a whole different world for it. So a lot of the research that went to the book, there's like a lot of research I've done on not only the anthropology of stateless societies, but also the origin of states in history. Kind of goes into the background of the salt states, and they're really terrifying. It's basically just the encounter with the salt state is something that's always like present. That the chance that you might find like a hero of the salt states in your travels that might pose a huge threat to you, because they generally take Windfolk captives and they take them back for like slave labor and whatnot. But it's very interesting because they had a sort of like catch-22 sort of thing in their society, which is like they're all working. Each of the salt sort of like vassals or the people that are in the salt states, they all work for a lord. And in their sort of like mythology or their religion, the idea is that one day one lord is going to rise above the rest and is going to basically own all of the salt from which like tokens and money is made, and they're going to cancel debts. So the purpose that each of those persons is working towards is noble, is the cancellation of all debts. But the means through them, like this war between lords, it's basically crabs in a bucket. It's terrifying. Sort of like working through the nuances of like these guys aren't actually evil. They're just trapped. They're trapped in a system that it has horrifying consequences, even if your intentions are actually great. And so I think that's something that I wanted to represent, and also presenting the idea that mainly, like, even if there's a lot of different roles and archetypes of what someone can be in the societies of the salt states, the main person that the Windfolk are likely going to find beyond the border of states is a hero, like a hero of the salt states. And that hero sort of represents the archetypal traveler that you might find in a D&D campaign as a player. Like, they're there to like make to like the wild secure and bring fortune and fame and glory back home, and you're facing against that, and it's terrifying. Like, it's and that's your average, I don't know, Pathfinder character maybe. But in this game, it's a pretty horrific sort of like existential threat that's there. And it's represented in the mechanics in different ways. One of them is the idea of heroic violence, the fact that the harm that you might incur from falling out of a tree, or maybe like a lion or someone hurting you, is different from the sort of violence that you get from a hero of the salt states, because that violence is justified. It's systemic. Like, you're not suffering from systemic violence when you fall off a cliff, or when a wild animal protects like their brethren from you as a hunter or something like that. But you suffering violence from like a salt states hero is part of a systemic thing that has different rules. Like, you don't just lose tokens. Like, if you get shot by or cut with like the sword of a salt states hero, you literally have to drop tokens on your character sheet and puncture it, or draw a line and just cut through the sheet. It has a completely different meaning, and in a way, it's a pretty dramatic thing. It breaks the game in a way, and sort of like talking about the different phases of violence is something that I wanted to do through the inclusion of the salt states and salt state heroes and heroic violence. And I think it's pretty cool. It's a cool implementation of it. So yeah, that's something I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Fede, thank you so much for giving us your time today. Where can people find you and your work?
They can find me at Blue Sky, for sure. My Blue Sky is I think Sohns, Sohns. They can also find the Arcana Blue Sky, which I think is Arcana .blue sky. Arcana is spelled Araukana. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. So yeah, generally, if you search for Arcana, you're going to find Zephyr stuff. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for coming and for learning with us about this beautiful, fascinating game. Take care of yourselves, and from everyone at Streaming Rainbow, we hope you have a beautiful day. Take care.
Bye-bye.